The horror movie character is an unpredictable beast. While many leads, supports, and villains are seemingly doomed from the opening crawl, they often defy our expectations and come back with a vengeance, or at least make it to the end without croaking. Sometimes, though, you have no idea how they made it out alive, considering just how close they skirted with death. So with that in mind, I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are horror movie characters who are seconds away from dying. Paul Misery. A sucker for punishment, successful romance novelist Paul Sheldon has a rough ride in the Stephen King adaptation of Misery. I mean, it's kind of in the name. In this movie, Paul crashes his car during a blizzard before being rescued from the wreckage by the solitary local nurse Annie Wilkes. Annie nurses him, feeds him, and forces him, under pain of torture, to write a new novel for her. While the unlucky author has a number of close shaves with death throughout the film, from the initial car crash through to the final fight with his captor, there is one moment in particular that is a cut above the rest. In a particularly melancholic moment following her slaying of the local sheriff, Annie decides that it's time for her and Paul to check out, advancing on him with a syringe and a gun. But Paul stops her in her tracks with a well-timed "I love you too." Bluffing his way out of imminent doom, Paul convinces Annie that, if she lets him live a little longer, he can complete the new novel and give it back to the world before they leave it together, buying him time to plot his escape and her demise. Libby, I saw what you did. One of the horror thrillers that attempted to fill cinema's Hitchcock-shaped gap in the mid-60s, William Castle's I Saw What You Did managed to snag John Ireland and a late-career Joan Crawford for this movie. Here, two teenage girls, Libby Mannering and Kate Austen, prank call a man called Steve who has murdered his wife. Oblivious to the facts of the matter and the danger they are putting themselves in, they tell him that they saw what he did and know who he is, beginning a deadly game of crossed wires and mistaken identities. By the conclusion of the film, Libby has put two and two together though and foolishly thinks that she's safe to go it alone. Waiting in the backseat of her car, Steve suddenly springs an attack, intending to silence her for good. But then Steve is shot dead through the rear window. The state trooper who came to check on the girls early in the film stuck around, and isn't that a stroke of luck? Shigaharu Audition. Takashi Miike's Audition really doesn't mess around when it comes to charting the stone-cold brutality of the damaged human spirit. In the film, baby doll psychic killer Isami Yamazaki has an abusive past that haunts her, which manifests as a possessive-repulsive dichotomous relationship with the men she seduces, which drives her to torture, maim, and even murder. One such victim comes in the form of the film's protagonist, the unlucky-in-love widower Shigeru Aoyama, who stages the titular audition in the hopes of finding a new Mrs. Right. While things fly along merrily enough during their initial entanglement, Isami eventually drugs him so that he is paralyzed, yet still able to feel pain, and then tortures him to the end of death. With the blood swiftly draining from him and one foot severed, Isami is about to make inroads on the other when Shigeharu's son, Shigehiko, walks in on them. In the ensuing fight, Shigehiko himself comes within seconds of death, but ultimately triumphs over Isami, booting her down the stairs and breaking her neck. Thomasson The Witch. Set in 1630s New England, Anya Taylor-Joy plays Thomasson, the daughter of a Puritan family that encounters what may be the forces of darkness in the woods behind their farm. Paranoia suddenly engulfs the family, and soon they are seeing witchcraft and devilry in all the misfortunes that befall them, including the death of the other children and the supposedly malicious machinations of Black Phillip, the family goat/banter merchant. In a harrowing scene following the goring of her father by Black Phillip, Thomasson must fight her own mother Catherine, who blames all of their woes on her. Taking Thomasson to the ground, Catherine beats her and then begins choking her with all the strength she has. When it looks like Thomasson can't hold on for a second longer though, she strikes with a billhook, stabbing her mother to death but saving herself in the process. Early 1900s man, The Endless. Okay, so this one is a little bit different, but it's far too good to leave off. In the film, brothers Justin and Aaron Smith receive a videotape in the post enticing them to Camp Arcadia, the wilderness-based death cult or peace commune depending on which way you look at it, which they abandoned years before. But all is not as it seems, and soon the entity, a mysterious presence capable of creating and controlling time loops, makes itself known. Amongst its many victims and captors is the nameless individual known only in the film's credits as Early 1900s Man. Forced into a few-second time loop by the entity for the better part of a century, early 1900s man is forever just moments away from his own death. Trapped on a wooden chair inside a small tent, forever trying to escape this mortal coil. Every time he makes a run for the door of the tent, the entity pulls him back from the edge of a gruesome death and he finds himself on his seat once again. Nowhere fresh. Daisy Edgar Jones's Nowhere comes so close to death many times throughout this underrated gem fresh. After she's kidnapped by the psychotic surgeon Steve, who intends to keep her alive in captivity in order to slowly carve her up and sell her meat to high-paying elite cannibals around the world, Nowhere is eventually able to manipulate her way out of the situation. Playing into Steve's desire for her, Noah lulls him into believing that she really loves him, which allows her the opportunity to bite his penis off and then escape. Now Steve isn't one to let something like a little bit of knob terror slow him down though, and brutally attacks Noah and the other captives. Eventually, the women get the upper hand though and put a bullet through its head. The nightmare doesn't stop there though, as Steve's wife, also in on his side hustle, shows up and assaults Noah when she's separated from her friends. She's just about done for, having the life choked out of her before shanking Steve's wife with her final breath. Detective Hoffman, Saw 6. Initially introduced as one of the franchise's many police detectives in Saw 3, corrupt detective Lieutenant Mark Hoffman rose to prominence in the film's sequels, going rogue as a Jigsaw accomplice and then again as something of a free radical aligned with no one but himself. But this constant and quite frankly exhausting double-crossing almost scuppered him in Saw 6. Captured by Jill Tuck, Jigsaw's wife, Hoffman is locked into a reverse bear trap, one of the series' most enduring murder devices. Unfortunately for all though, Detective Hoffman knows how to play the game and makes it out of the trap literally a few seconds before it springs open, his right cheek being torn apart in the process, but otherwise no worse for wear. Michael Halloween Kills. Against all the odds, the Shape is on the move again in this sequel, and the film picks up where we left off in Halloween 2018. Michael makes his escape from the burning building, walking through the flames and slaughtering an entire firefighter crew before going on the hunt for Laurie Strode and her family once again, intent on finishing what he started. However, for the first time in the Halloween franchise's history, he comes face to face with the victimized citizens of Haddonfield and almost takes an L. In a brutal beatdown unlike anything we've ever seen visited upon the Halloween villain before, Tommy Doyle's mob lay Michael out with pretty much every kind of weapon imaginable, including a baseball bat, a crowbar, his own knife, and a gun. Lying prone in the middle of the road, lifeless and defeated with his own knife in his back, Michael looks like a goner for sure. But more the fool us for celebrating too soon. Just as he's about to get capped in the noggin, Michael catches a second wind and goes to town on his would-be killers. Feeding off the mob's rage and thirst for vengeance, he slices throats, opens chests, and gets back down to business. Ripley Alien. In terms of filmmaking innovation alone, Ridley Scott's original sci-fi horror Alien is in a class of its own. Only one of two women on the spaceship the Nostromo, Warrant Officer Ripley is subjected to the many poor decisions of her male crewmates and soon finds herself in a fight for her life against an alien invader. You know, acid spit, teeth-filled tongue, long phallic latexy head, you might know of him. Following the death of her crewmates and the destruction of the Nostromo though, Ripley legs it onto the escape shuttle with nothing but crew cat Jones for company, or at least so she thinks. Preparing for stasis, she almost doesn't notice the stowaway on board. After spotting the xenomorph though, donning a spacesuit and attempting to gas the thing to death, Ripley is almost out of options. It bears down in her one last time, teeth bared, ready to tear her apart and kill off some major sequel potential. But just as it might have gotten away with it, Ripley's quick thinking with the airlock release means that it's sent to an early grave. Dewey Scream 2. Scream 2 picks the story up at Windsor College, where series protagonist Sidney Prescott is being haunted by the ghost face of her past. And soon enough, the whole gang is drawn back into the fray, including Gail and Dewey. Now, it's not a Scream movie if Deputy Dewey doesn't stare death directly in the eye, but Scream 2's encounter feels just a little bit too close for comfort. During one of the film's most tense sequences, Ghostface hunts Gail through the university's audio labs. Dewey comes to find her without checking his corners, and before you can ask, do you like scary movies, the killer gets the drop on him. Separated by some industry-standard soundproofing, we are left to imagine Gail's screams as Dewey is knifed bloody and hurled against the plexiglass window. The thing is though, I have absolutely no idea how Dewey survived this. It's seemingly hours since he's attacked before being pulled out by paramedics, and how he didn't bleed out is anyone's guess, but I am very pleased he didn't.
Lindsay, Halloween Kills. When it was announced that Kyle Richards would be reprising her role of Lindsay in Halloween Kills, a part that she originated as a child in John Carpenter's 1978 Halloween, the first question from many fans was, well, how is she going to die then? But while fellow returning character Tommy was indeed felled by Michael Myers, Lindsay just barely made it out of the sequel alive. It certainly wasn't for lack of trying on Michael's part though, as when Kyle attacks him with a sack of bricks in the movie's climax, he responds by grabbing her throat and shoving her against the nearby car. And Michael looks like he's about 2 seconds away from crushing Lindsay's windpipe, snapping her neck, or simply crushing her head to a sheer pulp, but she quite smartly decides to quickly rip his mask off. And as we all know, Michael's a bit particular about wearing his mask, and so immediately throws Lindsay to the ground whilst he puts it back on, giving her precious seconds to flee into the nearby woods and successfully hide. Paul, Wolf Creek 2. Wolf Creek 2 sees another trio of young travellers being preyed upon by sadistic outback murderer Mick Taylor, with the only one of the three to make it to the end of the movie alive being British tourist Paul, but only just. To say that Paul has a near brush with death is quite the understatement. Early on, he's very nearly shot in the head by Mick's rifle, and the next morning his car is nudged off the edge of a steep hillside by Mick's truck. But things only get worse from there. You see, Paul is inexplicably relatively unscathed by the car crash, but as he turns back to the hillside, Mick decides to send the truck hurtling over it towards his position. Paul turns around just in time to see what's about to happen and runs clear mere seconds before the truck collides with his car, causing both to go up in a giant fireball. At this point, we're still only halfway through the movie, and Paul spends the rest of it having further close calls with Mick, including being captured and tortured. But at film's end, Paul catches a lucky break when Mick evidently loses interest and just lets him go. Though Paul is left mentally broken by his ordeal, at least he narrowly avoided brutal deaths several times over. Sally, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. As gutsy and resourceful as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre's heroine Sally is, her luck nevertheless seemed to run out at the film's end when attempting to flee her cannibalistic captors. Sally manages to escape from the Sawyer family clutches and make a run for it to the road outside their homestead, albeit with the Sawyer brothers giving chase. The hitchhiker is able to catch up to a wounded and exhausted Sally and starts slashing away at her with a knife in the middle of the road. But before the hitchhiker can finish the job, an 18-wheeler plows through the middle of the road and positively creams him, inadvertently saving her life. Sally then has to contend with the chainsaw-wielding Leatherface, but is aided by the trucker, who throws a wrench at Leatherface before he can strike at Sally, causing him to fall over and slice his own leg. And in her third and final close call inside of a hot minute, she leaps into the bed of a passing truck mere moments before Leatherface can grab her, finally getting to safety once and for all. Rowan and Sunaran, Jason X. Now, Jason X ends with the movie's two remaining human characters, Rowan and Sunaran, attempting to escape a cybernetically enhanced Jason Voorhees by evacuating to a shuttle. But various attempts to keep Jason busy while they flee, including distracting him with a holographic simulation of Camp Crystal Lake, ultimately fall apart. Jason starts marching towards the escaped vessel to make short work of the pair when all of a sudden a third human survivor, Brodsky, played by Peter Mensa, shows up in an EVA suit and attacks Jason, allowing the others to get free. But it doesn't even end there. The ship explodes, improbably catapulting Jason towards the escape pod. Yet just as Jason approaches, he's intercepted and tackled out of the pod's way, sending both into the atmosphere of Earth 2, where they're incinerated by the planet's atmosphere. Jason X may be a fundamentally insane movie, but at least our heroic pair made it through the final stretch, even if it did have to come with an epic save from one of their former teammates. Gail Weathers, Scream 4. The Scream franchise sure as hell loves its near-miss character deaths, and by the fourth film it had perhaps become a little tired seeing Dewey inexplicably survive yet another stabbing from Ghostface. But Scream 4's climax very nearly saw Dewey's wife Gail bite the bullet, when the film's remaining killer, Sidney's psychotic cousin Jill, got the drop on her. In the hospital, Jill has brutally beaten both Sidney and Dewey, and also non-fatally shot Judy Hicks, leaving Gail as the only hero standing. Jill holds Gail at gunpoint and literally tells her that she's going to enjoy blowing her head off, but spends just long enough posturing that Sidney can regain consciousness, fire up the defibrillator, and shock Jill in the head, knocking her out. Had Jill spent a little less time relishing the situation, or the defibrillator took a teensy bit longer to warm up, well, Gail would have been dead meat indeed. Luke, The Strangers Pray at Night. The Strangers' Prayer at Night is basically remembered for a single great scene when protagonist Kinsey's brother Luke faces off against a pair of the murderous strangers at the trailer park's pool area. Luke manages to stab one of the duo to death, but the second axe-wielding one puts up a considerably fiercer fight, resulting in them falling into the nearby swimming pool, all while Bonnie Tyler's iconic Total Eclipse of the Heart scores their scuffle. Yet Luke is no physical match for his assailant, who stabs him in the side and leaves him to bleed out in the pool. As the pool fills with blood and Luke suffers serious internal injuries, he starts sinking below the water, unable to reach the pool side under his own steam. But just as he's about to drown, he's dragged to the edge of the pool by Kinsey, arriving just in time to save him from a slow and agonizing death. Kinsey then goes into full final girl mode when Luke is out of commission, but after she defeats the remaining strangers at film's end, we see him recuperating in hospital, confirming that he made it through the night in one piece, albeit very, very narrowly. Carla Wilson, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. It's safe to say that few predicted Carla to survive I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, given the horror genre's historically uncharitable treatment of black characters and also not great survival record of Julie James's friends. But Carla just barely survives the events of the film, despite being viciously attacked by the returning vengeful fisherman Ben Willis. As Carla and Nancy look for a first aid kit, Nancy leaps in front of Carla just as one of their friends appears before them, having been fatally harpooned. At this point, they fall on top of Nancy, leaving her defenseless as Ben drives the harpoon down through their corpse and into her own body, killing her. As for Carla, well, Ben slashes at her, sending her flailing through a glass door to her apparent death. But at the very end of the movie, it's revealed that Carla in fact survived her hit and run with Ben, and for two clear reasons. Ben got sloppy and didn't finish her off, and Nancy inadvertently saved her life by jumping in front of her. If Nancy hadn't done that, then their former friend would have surely fallen on Carla instead, and she would have presumably received the aforementioned harpooning. Neil Gordon, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. The cult fave third entry into a Nightmare on Elm Street franchise is perhaps best remembered for killing off original series heroine Nancy Thompson, yet ended up leaving a considerably less expected character alive. Dr. Neil Gordon is the psychiatrist caring for the young patients being terrorized by Freddy Krueger, and in the film's climax, he teams up with Nancy's father Donald to find Freddy's remains and finally put him to rest. But this results in the pair being terrorized by Freddy's reassembled bones, the skeletal figure first killing Don by impaling him and then beating Neil unconscious with a shovel before covering him in dirt. Yet Freddy impatiently leaves the scene to continue attacking the other heroes, his expedience seemingly getting the better of him, given that Neil is later shown to have survived his attack. Furthermore, he eventually performs last rites on Freddy's remains, putting him to rest, albeit only until the next movie. Geez, Freddy, if you spent just one more second caving that guy's head in with that shovel, your defeat might have been utterly avoided.
Kristen McKay, The Strangers. Back in 2008, Brian Bettino's The Strangers ended with one of the very best, most blood-curdling screams in all of modern horror. And that's if you count 2008 as modern, because that's already a scary amount of time ago. But yes, that scream, it belonged to Liv Tyler's Kristen, one half of a couple who'd been tormented by the ominous trio of Man in the Mask, Dollface, and Pinup Girl. With that terror being set at a remote family holiday home, the final act of The Strangers sees Kristen and her boyfriend James tied to chairs, where those three killers are masked, which makes it clear that, yeah, Kristen and James, they are well and truly done for. After all, if the strangers have revealed their faces, that means these lovebirds have to be killed. And that's what happens. Well, to James at least. While both James and Kristen are frantically, supposedly fatally stabbed by our killers, who leave the property once their work is done, the very final shot of The Strangers has two young boys discover these corpses, only for a horrifying scream from Kristen to reveal that, nope, she somehow survived. James, not so much so. Jake, Jaws the Revenge. If you saw Jaws the Revenge in a US theatre at the time of its release in 1987, you'll have seen a notably different ending than what pretty much anyone else has seen. In the final act of Jaws 4, we're out in the middle of the ocean as Ellen Brody and co. look to take out the great white shark that's followed them all the way from Amity Island. And as part of this, one piece of collateral damage is Mario Van Peebles' Jake, who's dragged underwater by the shark after dropping an electrical device into its mouth. And with that, it appears Jake has bitten the bullet, especially as he's never seen again, as the shark is impaled and explodes. Only for the faint screams of Jake to be heard in the distance. As Michael Brody rescues him from the water, Jake somehow managing to just about avoid death. As for that original US screening of Jaws the Revenge, nah, Jake, he totally didn't resurface, instead being killed by the shark. By the time Jaws 4 made it to international screens though, that ending was changed so that Jake lived, which is the ending seen on all subsequent home releases, from VHS to DVD to Blu-ray to 4K. Preacher, Deep Blue Sea. Sticking with that shark theme, while Deep Blue Sea's final moments saw Dr. Susan McAllister devoured by the film's last remaining super smart shark, one other person who so nearly joined McAllister here is LL Cool J's Preacher. When McAllister, Preacher, and Carter Blake finally make their way to the ocean's surface in that final act, Preacher is pretty much immediately grabbed by this shark, dragged around, hanging out of the shark's mouth, and seemingly totally toast. The irony, a cook, toast. It works itself. Throughout Deep Blue Sea, the picture's genetically enhanced sharks have been pretty unstoppable forces of nature whenever they've come up against their human prey. And so, at a first watch, you just kind of presume that, yeah, Preacher, he is next on this hit list. That is, until the man himself, who is indeed a man of faith, uses his crucifix to stab the shark in the eye, causing it to release him. Sure, Preacher was left with a badly wounded, badly bleeding leg, but were it not for this piece of smart thinking, it was only a matter of minutes before Preacher would wind up as Shark Jow. Ed Jr., the Mutilator. It may often fly under the radar when discussing the all-time great slasher movies, but Buddy Cooper's The Mutilator is a whole lot of fun, largely revolving around the long-standing disdain Big Ed has for his son Ed Jr. You see, The Mutilator opens on Big Ed's birthday, as we see Ed's wife baking a cake and his son polishing his dad's guns as a birthday treat. Unfortunately, one of those guns goes off and kills Ed's wife, which, leaving loaded guns around kids is it's a pretty stupid idea in the first place. But anyway, Big Ed returns home to find his wife dead, slaps his son, then settles down with his wife's corpse and tries to feed her some bourbon. Skip ahead a decade or so later, and Ed Jr. and his college pals end up targeted by a maniac. A maniac that, it's Big Ed. It's Big Ed, who spent years stewing over the death of his wife. By the time we get to the final few minutes of The Mutilator, 4 of Ed Jr.'s friends are dead, plus a cop, as Ed and Pam are the last 2 standing. Well, for a bit, for Ed is taken off his feet after an attack by his old man, with Big Ed standing over his fallen boy, ready to strike the killing blow. Instead, Big Ed has a moment of hesitation, which is distracted by Pam, and Big Ed decides, nah, I'll just stab the lad in the leg rather than properly doom him. And with that, Ed Jr. managed to avoid death. Only just about, though he'd be forced to then put his dad down for good, minutes later splitting him in half after hitting him with a car, which is quite the sentence there. Abe The Windmill Massacre. Given the title of the film, me personally, I was not expecting too much from The Windmill Massacre, but this 2016 release is actually a whole lot of fun, centering around a group of tourists in the Netherlands who end up in the crosshairs of an avenging demon near a remote windmill. While these tourists are from all over the globe, Abe, he is the local guide who brings them all together. And despite his bubbly, at times bumbling demeanour, it of course also turns out that Abe's in cahoots with that demon Miller. By the film's final moments, all of these tourists are dead, apart from Australian nanny Jennifer and young English boy Kurt, with Jennifer rescuing Kurt and slicing Abe's neck in the process. Just as it looks like Abe is about to bite the bullet and bleed out though, he quite smartly uses some bone meal to pack his wound, in turn saving his own life, with the demon Miller then brutally probably out of nowhere as well, taking out Jennifer. Seriously, don't let the slightly ropey title put you off The Windmill Massacre, also known as simply The Windmill in certain markets. Ed Warren, The Conjuring 2. While not quite up to the standard of the fantastic first movie, The Conjuring 2 was still a very solid picture. This time with paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren dealing with the Enfield haunting, a very real, alleged account of spooky supernatural activity in a London suburb in the late 1970s. For the Warrens, they head to Enfield to see if the possession of young Janet Hodgson is indeed legitimate. Though one problem is that Lorraine, she has been having visions of Ed dying at this very same house when he's trying to save Janet. And wouldn't you know it, but this vision starts to become a reality at the film's end. Ed perilously dangling out of a bedroom window, trying to save Janet, but with a rather ominous tree spike waiting on the floor. A tree spike that Lorraine has seen will fatally impale her husband. With Ed mere seconds from falling to his death, Lorraine, she nicely remembers the name of Valak, the demon pulling the strings here, and a demon who can be stopped in its tracks simply by somebody saying its name. Et voila, no shish kebab dead Warren. Vera Porter, The Centerfold Girls. Released in 1974, The Centerfold Girls is pretty much what you'd expect from a horror movie with that title, as in a crazed maniac stalks some centerfold models. To be fair, to say Clement Jude is a crazed maniac is maybe a little inaccurate. For this killer, he is eerily calm, immaculately dressed, seriously, he has some proper swanky shoes, and is far from your usual mystery master man. The film is split into 3 separate stories, all with a different victim, the only difference being the final story's victim, well, they end up not actually being a victim, for they survive their run-in with Clement. It's certainly a close call though, with Vera, the killer's latest target, driven out into the middle of nowhere, where Clement has a knife to her throat. This all seems very familiar, with audiences expecting a similar story to what had happened with Clement's previous victims. The catch here though is that a chase through some woods causes the killer's glasses to be knocked off, messing with his eyesight. Hey, we've all been there, any spectacle wearers out there, it is the worst when you lose your specs. And eventually giving Vera the chance to stab him to death. Danny Torrance, The Shining. If it wasn't for the smarts of young Danny Torrance, the kiddo would have been toast at the end of The Shining. Of course, by the end of that film, Danny's dad Jack has gone full on nuts, having killed poor Dick Halloran and then doing his utmost to kill his wife and son, which all culminates with a deranged Jack chasing Danny through a snowy maze. The erratic father intends on slaughtering his offspring. Given the sheer crazed insanity of Jack and his size, strength and speed advantage, it looks, at least on a first watch, and if you're not familiar with the books, that Danny doesn't stand a chance here. But that's where those smarts come in, with Danny stepping backwards through his own snowy footprints to hide from his old man, avoiding certain death, with Jack then getting lost in this maze where he eventually freezes to death.